Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is just incredibly personal for all of us: how we actually handle sudden, overwhelming tragedy. Look, sometimes life just hits you hard, right? Bad news pours in back to back. It could be a sudden loss of health, an unexpected job termination, or, unimaginably, losing someone you deeply love. So today, we're going to unpack a really powerful pastoral framework for not just surviving those dark moments, but maintaining a resilient faith. A faith that can literally survive the ashes. You know, in that exact moment when our lives are completely turned upside down, this massive, heavy question inevitably surfaces. We aren't just asking what's happening, we're asking the deeper, much more agonizing mystery: where is God when all this happens? Well, the book of Job was written specifically to tackle this exact painful reality. And here's the thing: it is absolutely not a book that offers cheap, easy answers. It doesn't pat you on the back and say, hey, if you're just a good person, you'll never suffer. No way. Instead, it invites us right into the raw, messy, and complex reality of human suffering. It completely acknowledges that our pain goes way deeper than what people see on the surface. Right out of the gate, the text in Job 111 completely shuts down a really cruel assumption. It introduces Job as a blameless and upright man who feared God. This is absolutely crucial. Before a single calamity struck, God himself declared Job's character to be righteous. So right from verse 1, the text firmly closes the door on this toxic idea that all suffering is just a direct punishment from God. Bad things happening to you doesn't automatically mean you are a bad person.
Section 1. The danger of judging. Words without compassion.
Job's suffering wasn't just physical or financial, it was deeply, painfully social. His friends basically operated on this simplistic, toxic equation. If you are suffering, it must be a punishment for some hidden sin. But here is the biblical truth we need to grab hold of. The church is meant to be a hospital for the broken, not a courtroom for the suffering. We are absolutely not called to be a jury sitting around pointing fingers. We're called to be a house of comfort, a house of prayer. We are simply called to sit down and weep with those who weep.
Section 2. Behind the veil. The unseen spiritual reality.
To really understand Job's reality, the text pulls back the curtain to show us the heavenly throne room. In chapter 1, Satan steps forward and essentially asks God, hey, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan is claiming that our faith is totally bought by blessings. He's arguing that the second life gets hard, we're going to abandon God. And because of this accusation, Job becomes this cosmic test case. He's showing the entire universe what authentic, unshakable faith actually looks like, the kind of faith that holds on tight even when the tears just won't stop falling.
But look closely at the boundary set in Job 1:12. Honestly, this brings immense comfort. God permits the test, yes, but he sets very strict boundaries. He says, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger. Listen, Satan is an accuser, but he absolutely does not sit on the throne. God dictates the limits. So even when we can't figure out the why behind our own unanswered prayers, we can find deep peace just knowing exactly who is ultimately in charge.
Section 3. Honest faith. Crying is not a sign of weakness. We really need to bust a massive myth about what faith looks like. Job wasn't some stoic, emotionless statue. Right after his initial loss, he wept bitterly. He was devastated. He even cursed the day he was born. And yet the text is clear that he did not sin. This right here is a beautiful working definition of mature faith. It's bringing our raw, unfiltered tears directly to God rather than pretending we're strong enough to handle it all ourselves. Honest faith is just a broken heart speaking to God, trusting that he is close to the brokenhearted.
And this brilliantly connects to what Jesus teaches in the New Testament. Over in Luke 13, Jesus talks about a sudden tragedy where the Tower of Siloam collapsed, tragically killing 18 people. The crowds immediately assumed those victims must have been terrible sinners to deserve a fate like that. But Jesus completely stops them in their tracks. He emphatically says no. We must never, ever weaponize tragedies against the victims. Natural disasters, a sudden illness, a terrible accident, these are not proof that someone is a worse sinner. They're actually sobering reminders for all of us to humble ourselves before God.
Section 4. God reveals himself. The answer in the whirlwind. So after chapters and chapters of agonizing debate, God finally speaks to Job from a whirlwind. But interestingly, he doesn't give Job a theological syllabus explaining the why behind it all. Instead, he reveals his own breathtaking majesty. And Job's response in chapter 42, verse 5 is just beautiful. He says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you."
The profound takeaway for us here is that true spiritual restoration starts with a fresh, personal encounter with God Himself, often way before our actual circumstances ever change.
Section 5. Our Redeemer lives, hope in the midst of ashes.
This is really the emotional climax of our explainer. Right smack in the middle of his absolute darkest hour, Job discovers this unshakable hope. Listen to the absolute conviction in his voice in Job 19:25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Notice his phrasing there. He doesn't say, well, I feel like maybe someone's going to help me out. He says, I know. He is staking his entire existence on a living Redeemer.
And for us today, that ancient declaration shines even brighter. See, Job looked forward in faith, but we get to look back at the historical reality of Jesus Christ. Our Redeemer isn't distant or disconnected from our pain. He stepped directly into it. Jesus was rejected. He was mocked, beaten, and crucified. He entered the ultimate ashes of death. But on the third day, he rose. Because our Redeemer lives, we know for a fact that suffering simply does not get the final say.
Section 6. A pastoral call. The response of the church.
So let's walk through what this actually means for us practically. First, if you are the one suffering right now, please do not let go of God. Bring your brokenness to Him exactly as you are. Second, if you're watching someone else suffer, do not judge them quickly. Be that faithful, silent, comforting presence they need. And third, for every single one of us, remember where this whole story is heading. Revelation 21:4 promises that one day God Himself will wipe away every single tear from our eyes. Our ultimate destination isn't the ashes, it's glory.
We've covered some really heavy yet incredibly hopeful ground today. You know, you might be sitting in the ashes of disappointment right now, carrying a heavy load of unanswered questions. But the good news is, you don't have to carry them alone. The ultimate question for us is this: will you yield your pain and your tears to the living Redeemer today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. May you leave today with the unshakable, steadfast certainty that your Redeemer lives.